What would you do if the person you waited years to be with, your soulmate, your perfect match, turned out to be hiding a disgusting, unthinkable secret? Imagine standing at the altar, pledging your love, believing you found your forever, only to discover, on your wedding night, that everything you knew was a lie. The night that was supposed to be filled with passion and love, turned into a crime scene. And the man who preached forgiveness and faith? He became a cold-blooded killer. He was a respected pastor, a man of deep faith, a leader of his congregation. She was a nurse, a caregiver, a woman who seemed to embody kindness and devotion. Together, they were the ideal couple, proof that true love could withstand the test of time and temptation. They waited 2 long years, honoring a vow of purity. Their wedding was a lavish event, celebrated by church members and hospital colleagues alike. Everything was perfect, until the truth came out. A secret so repulsive, so unforgivable, it drove a man of God to commit the ultimate sin. Welcome to Everyday True Crime, where we uncover the most shocking, twisted, and unbelievable true crimes hidden beneath the surface of ordinary lives. If you thought you'd heard it all, think again, because this story will leave you speechless. Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. For Pastor Elijah Caldwell, faith wasn't just a belief, it was his entire existence. He was a man of unwavering conviction, a shepherd to his flock, a leader who inspired hope and righteousness. At just 35 years old, he had built a reputation as a powerful speaker, a kind soul, and a man who truly practiced what he preached. His sermons were fiery yet compassionate, his devotion to his church unshakable, and his heart open and full of love, a heart he had reserved for one woman. That woman was Serena Hayes. 32 years old, stunning, soft-spoken, and deeply respected in the community. She was the type of woman people instantly admired, smart, dedicated, a nurse who cared for her patients as if they were her own family. She carried herself with a quiet grace, her smile gentle, her words measured, as if every syllable had been carefully chosen. And perhaps they had. Their love story felt like a divine union, the kind of romance people prayed for. They met at a charity event hosted by Elijah's church, where Serena had volunteered to provide free medical checkups for underprivileged families. Elijah had been immediately drawn to her kindness, the way she spoke to the children with warmth, the way she listened intently to the elderly who came to her for help. She, in turn, had been captivated by his strength, his wisdom, the way he commanded a room without arrogance. They started talking. Then praying together. Then sharing late-night phone calls, exchanging Bible verses and dreams of a shared future. Within months, they were inseparable. It was a love built on faith and patience, or so Elijah believed. But there was one boundary Serena never let him cross. No matter how deep their connection grew, physical intimacy was off-limits. Serena told him she was waiting for marriage, that she wanted to honor God and keep herself pure. Elijah, though a red-blooded man with desires, respected her wishes. After all, wasn't this the test of true love? If he truly loved her, he could wait. And so he did. 2 years. 2 long years of restraint, of devotion, of unwavering commitment. They shared everything else, holidays, birthdays, long walks in the park, quiet moments after Sunday service, planning a future together. Serena's sweet nature and faithfulness made Elijah believe he had found the one. What he didn't know was that he had fallen in love with an illusion. Serena wasn't the woman he thought she was. She had secrets buried so deep, even she had started believing her own lies. Secrets that would turn their love story into a nightmare. Serena Hayes had perfected the art of deception. By day, she was the devoted fiancée of Pastor Elijah Caldwell, a compassionate nurse, and a woman admired for her grace and faith. By night, she lived a different reality, one fueled by reckless desires, stolen moments, and the thrill of deception. Serena wasn't the untouched, virtuous woman Elijah believed her to be. She was a woman of secrets. For 2 years, she had lied effortlessly, playing the role of the God-fearing, patient bride-to-be, while indulging in a world Elijah could never have imagined. She wasn't waiting, she was hiding. Her nights were spent in hotel rooms with men she barely knew, the sheets still warm from the last occupant. She exchanged soft whispers with married lovers who called her late at night, slipping away from their wives' beds to meet her. She had encounters in the back seat of cars, in dimly lit bars, in places where no one would recognize her. Her phone was a graveyard of deleted messages, numbers she could never save, voices she could never get too close to. She craved pleasure, validation, excitement, anything that made her feel alive. With every encounter, she told herself it was the last time. But she always went back. There was something addictive about it, the way men looked at her, the way they desired her, the way she could become someone else, if only for a little while. She never considered the risks. Not when she ignored the discomfort that lingered long after the pleasure faded. Not when she felt the first whispers of irritation, a dull ache, a quiet warning. Not when it became harder to ignore, the burning, the itching, the undeniable signs that something was wrong. She pushed it aside, convincing herself it was nothing. A minor infection. A passing irritation. She had more important things to focus on, like her wedding. She didn't have time for doctors. She didn't have time for tests. She didn't have time to admit to herself what she already knew. So she let it fester. Let it grow. Let it consume her from the inside out. She thought she could hide it forever. She believed Elijah would never know. But the truth has a way of coming out. And when it did, it destroyed everything. It was the wedding of the year. The church was packed, every pew filled with beaming church members, proud family members, and colleagues from the hospital where Serena worked. The air was thick with the scent of fresh roses, the altar decorated with cascading white lilies and golden ribbons. The choir sang in perfect harmony, their voices lifting toward the heavens as Serena made her way down the aisle. Dressed in a dazzling white gown, she looked every bit the blushing, virtuous bride. Her veil draped delicately over her shoulders, her hands clutching a bouquet of soft pink peonies. She moved with grace, with poise, with the kind of elegance that made people lean in and whisper about how perfect she and Elijah were together. Elijah stood at the altar, his heart pounding in his chest. He had waited for this moment. For years, he had imagined his wedding day, the moment he would finally make Serena his wife. The moment he would be blessed by God for his patience. He watched her approach, her eyes sparkling beneath the cathedral lights, and felt nothing but pure love, pure devotion, pure gratitude. When they exchanged vows, Elijah's voice trembled with emotion. Serena's was steady, unwavering, practiced. As the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Elijah pulled her into his arms and kissed her, sealing what he believed to be the holiest, most unbreakable bond. The reception was a grand affair. The banquet hall was filled with laughter, the clinking of glasses, the sound of a live band playing soft jazz. Guests danced beneath glittering chandeliers, plates were piled high with gourmet dishes, and champagne flowed freely. Church elders blessed their union, hospital colleagues toasted to their happiness, and family members embraced them with teary-eyed joy. Elijah looked around the room, at the people who loved them, at the life he had built with Serena, and thought, "This is everything I ever wanted." He held her close as they swayed on the dance floor, whispering promises of forever, of the future they would build, of the children they would raise in faith. And Serena smiled. A perfect, practiced smile. A smile that hid the truth she could never speak. The night drifted into warm goodbyes, long hugs, and final blessings. As the last of the guests left, Elijah took his wife's hand, leading her toward their suite. His pulse quickened. Anticipation. Excitement. Desire. After years of restraint, of waiting, of holding back. Tonight, she was finally his. And he was about to discover a truth so vile, so unforgivable, it would shatter everything. Elijah had waited for this moment for years. As they stepped into their lavish honeymoon suite, he felt a thrill of anticipation. The room was perfect. A king-sized bed draped in satin sheets, soft candlelight flickering across the walls, rose petals scattered across the floor like a path to paradise. He turned to Serena, his beautiful wife, his answered prayer. She smiled at him, a mix of shyness and seduction in her eyes, and he felt his heart swell. Finally. He took her in his arms, their lips meeting in a kiss that was long overdue. The months of waiting, the years of self-control, it had all been leading to this. His hands moved over her body, slowly, reverently, worshipping the woman he had vowed to cherish for life. The heat between them built, passion igniting like a flame. His hands trembled as he undressed her. Every button undone was a step closer to consummating their love, fulfilling the promise they had made before God. He laid her down gently, his lips trailing kisses along her skin, whispering words of adoration. And then, everything changed. The moment he moved lower, a scent, a stench, hit him like a sledgehammer. It was foul. Rotten. Overpowering. His stomach clenched. His throat tightened. His body recoiled before his mind even had time to process what was happening. Gagging, he stumbled backward, his hands gripping the sheets for balance. The room blurred. The air thickened. The smell was so strong, so unbearable, it made his eyes water. His mind raced. What is that? Where is that coming from? He looked at Serena, confusion twisting into horror. The woman he had waited for, the woman he had cherished, the woman who had told him she was pure. The smell was coming from her. His heart pounded violently in his chest. This wasn't right. This wasn't normal. His stomach churned. His pulse pounded in his ears. For years, he had imagined this night, fantasized about the moment they would finally become one. But this? This was a nightmare. Elijah staggered back, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The foul stench clung to his nostrils, making his stomach turn. His eyes darted to Serena, still sprawled on the bed, watching him with a mix of confusion and irritation. His head spun. His chest tightened. This can't be real. This can't be happening. His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. What the hell is wrong with you? Serena sat up, pulling the sheets around her, her brows furrowing. What? His stomach churned again. He swallowed hard, trying to keep the bile from rising. What is this? He roared, his voice shaking with shock, disgust, betrayal. Serena's face twisted. What are you talking about? She snapped. She knew. She had to know. There was no way she didn't smell it. No way she didn't know something was wrong. But she just sat there, arms crossed, glaring at him like he was the problem. It's not that bad, she muttered. Not that bad. Elijah's body stiffened. His hands clenched into fists. Had she lost her mind? The stench was so unbearable, so gut-wrenching, so vile, it was like something had died inside her. And yet, she acted like it was nothing. The rage rose like a tidal wave. 2 years. 2 years of waiting. 2 years of self-control, of discipline, of longing. 2 years of believing she was pure, untouched, perfect. And now, here he was, gagging on the truth. Was this a joke? A test from God? His mind reeled. Had she been lying to him all along? Had she played him for a fool? The woman he loved, the woman he vowed to cherish. She had betrayed him. And in that moment, rage took control. Elijah's chest heaved. His fists trembled at his sides, nails digging into his palms. The pounding in his skull drowned out all reason. Serena's voice was still ringing in his ears, the lies, the deception, the sheer audacity. It's not that bad. His eyes darkened. His vision blurred. Before he could stop himself, his hand shot out, a sudden, explosive burst of fury. The first blow landed with a sickening crack against her cheek. Her head snapped to the side, her lips parting in shock. She barely had time to gasp before the next punch came. Then another. And another. His knuckles smashed into her skin, her cheek, her jaw, her temple. Serena screamed, her arms flailing, trying to push him away. But Elijah was too strong. Too angry. Too lost in the storm that had swallowed him whole. Her nails scraped against his arms, her legs kicked, but it was no use. He was relentless. Blow after blow, the sound of flesh on flesh, bone on bone filled the room. Her cries turned to whimpers. Then silence. Elijah stepped back, panting. His fists ached. His knuckles were raw, dripping with blood. His wife, his bride, his Serena, lay motionless on the bed. Her face was swollen, bruised, unrecognizable. Her chest did not rise. Her lips, the same lips he had kissed just hours ago, were now parted in a frozen, lifeless gasp. The realization hit him like a freight train. His hands shook. His legs buckled. What had he done? What had he just done? Panic crashed over him like a tidal wave. Elijah staggered back, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. His heart slammed against his ribcage. His vision blurred, the room spinning around him. Serena lay there, silent. Still. Lifeless. A choked sound crawled up his throat, part sob, part disbelief. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. His hands, his own hands, were covered in her blood. They trembled violently as he grabbed his phone, fingers slipping over the screen. He couldn't think. He couldn't breathe. All he knew was that he needed to undo this. Fix this. Somehow. He barely remembered dialing. The ringing felt like it lasted an eternity. Then. 911, what's your emergency? His throat tightened. For a moment, no words came. His mouth opened. Nothing. The weight of what he had done sat like a stone on his chest, pressing, suffocating. Then, finally. My wife, his voice was barely a whisper. She's not breathing. A pause. Sir, what happened? His head spun. What happened? What happened? The images flashed through his mind. His fists, her cries, the way her body went limp. The words wouldn't come. All he could do was breathe. Loud. Uneven. Gasping. The operator's voice was firm yet calm. Sir, I need you to stay with me. Is she responsive? Have you tried CPR? CPR. His stomach lurched. He dropped to his knees beside Serena's body, his hands hovering over her chest. He couldn't touch her. He couldn't bear to. His breaths came faster, more erratic. Sir, help is on the way. Stay calm. But he wasn't calm. His fingers dug into his scalp, gripping his hair as a scream, a raw, guttural sound, tore from his throat. The second stretched into eternity. Then. Sirens. Distant at first, then growing louder. Closer. Blue and red lights flashed through the window, painting the walls in violent streaks. Tires screeched. Doors slammed. Elijah was still kneeling by his wife's lifeless body when the officers approached him. His mind was a fog, clouded by disbelief, guilt, and horror. He had taken everything he knew, everything he stood for, and destroyed it in a moment of uncontrolled rage. The realization of what he had done hit him in waves, but he could barely process it before the cold metal of handcuffs snapped around his wrists. The officer who placed the cuffs on him didn't say a word. Elijah's hands, still stained with Serena's blood, were shaking uncontrollably. His eyes were hollow, staring down at the body of the woman he had vowed to cherish and love. He was no longer a pastor, a man of faith who preached about forgiveness and redemption. He was a killer, his actions forever condemned by his own hands. The officers led him outside, past the flashing lights of the police cars and the onlookers standing in stunned silence. His community, the very people who had once looked up to him as a beacon of righteousness, were now witnessing the fall of a man they had trusted. They had attended his sermons, praised his wisdom, and admired his devotion. Now, they could hardly believe the twisted truth: the man who had preached about love and salvation had just murdered his wife in a fit of rage. The church was in shock. How could Elijah, a man who had dedicated his life to serving God, commit such a heinous crime? The whispers spread quickly, the gossip growing louder with every passing hour. The news reports were filled with conflicting emotions, some expressing disbelief, others offering a sense of satisfaction, as though the pastor had been hiding his true nature all along. But there were those who still clung to the hope that he wasn't beyond redemption, that somehow, he would come to understand the depths of his crime and seek forgiveness. In the days that followed, the truth about Serena began to emerge. The facade of the sweet, devoted nurse she had presented to Elijah was just that, an illusion. Behind closed doors, she had led a double life, one full of secrets, lies, and promiscuity. She had been involved with multiple men during their relationship, never once disclosing the truth to her husband. She had concealed the fact that she had contracted several sexually transmitted infections, allowing them to worsen without ever seeking medical help. Serena had manipulated the pastor, playing on his faith and devotion to God, leading him to believe that she was a virgin, pure and untouched, saving herself for marriage. The discovery of Serena's infidelity and her untreated infections sent shockwaves through the investigation. The detectives pored through her past relationships, speaking with her former lovers, uncovering a trail of deceit and betrayal that had been hidden beneath her saintly appearance. But even with these revelations, Elijah's actions couldn't be justified. The trial was a spectacle, crowds gathered outside the courthouse, waiting to see how a man who had once been a revered leader in the church would face the consequences of his crime. The prosecution painted a picture of a cold, calculating killer, a man who had snapped after discovering his wife's betrayal. The defense, on the other hand, argued that Elijah had been overwhelmed by the emotional turmoil of discovering the truth about Serena, claiming that his actions were a result of temporary insanity. The jury was torn: was it really a crime of passion, or had Elijah harbored darker impulses all along, waiting for the right moment to explode? In the end, the jury convicted Elijah of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison, a sentence that would see him spend the remainder of his days behind bars. The judge stated that while the pastor had been severely emotionally impacted by the shock of his wife's betrayal, the brutality of his actions could not be excused. The question that haunted many was whether Elijah had truly snapped, or if his deep-seated rage had been lying dormant all along, waiting for the right catalyst to release. For Elijah, the fall from grace was absolute. He went from leading a congregation, holding the faith of his community in his hands, to becoming a convicted killer in the eyes of the world. He would spend his days in prison, haunted by the ghosts of his wife and his actions. The title of pastor was stripped from him, and all that remained was the legacy of violence he had left behind. As for Serena, she would never get the chance to tell her side of the story. Her life had ended in a moment of horrific violence, a victim of her own secrets and deceit. The twisted reality of their relationship would never be forgotten by those who had witnessed the tragedy unfold. In the end, no one emerged unscathed. Elijah's faith, his vows, and his future were shattered in an instant. And Serena's double life had come to a devastating conclusion, leaving behind nothing but pain, regret, and a community struggling to understand how it all went so terribly wrong. Love, betrayal, deception, rage, this case has it all. A story that begins with hope, devotion, and faith, only to spiral into an unimaginable tragedy. From the altar to a murder scene, this is the kind of darkness that no one saw coming. How could a man who preached about love and redemption, a man whose life was supposed to be a beacon of faith, fall so deeply into the abyss? How could he go from offering his heart to his bride to taking it all away in an explosion of rage? This case is a chilling reminder that no one, not even the most respected, can escape the consequences of their darkest secrets. The lies, the hidden truths, the years of deception, those secrets festered beneath the surface, until they were exposed in the most devastating way. And in an instant, a loving pastor became a murderer, his entire life torn apart in the wake of his actions. The real question is, how could someone so deeply trusted, so seemingly pure, be capable of such violence? How could love turn so quickly into hatred? If this story left you speechless, shocked to your core, get ready. There are plenty more dark, twisted, and disturbing cases lurking beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. Stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew about human nature, trust, and betrayal. So, if you want to hear more of these chilling, true crime stories, be sure to subscribe to Everyday True Crime. Trust us, this is just the beginning. You won't believe what's coming next.